My name is Samuel Bennett, and if you had seen me a year ago, you would have thought I was living the dream. Towering above the city in my sleek penthouse, I surveyed my empire, a fleet of luxury cars gleaming in the garage, invitations stacked neatly on my desk, and the hum of never-ending deals pulsing through my phone. To the outside world, I was the picture of success, confident, polished, untouchable. But behind that facade of achievement, something far more unsettling was growing, a silence so deep it threatened to swallow me whole. I didn't always live this way. I grew up the youngest of three in a modest suburban home where my parents taught me that hard work and integrity were priceless. My father worked double shifts at a steel mill. My mother held down two jobs to keep food on our table. Evenings were spent huddled around the kitchen table, my siblings and I doing homework under the dim yellow light while Mom baked bread and Dad offered words of encouragement. Those nights taught me that every penny earned meant something. Every sacrifice mattered. I carried that lesson with me like a talisman. After college, I threw myself into building my own tech startup. Late nights and early mornings blurred together as I pitched investors, coded features, and negotiated contracts. I skipped vacations, avoided birthdays, and watched friendships evaporate as I chased growth metrics and clicked through rates. Every milestone felt like a stepping stone to something greater. Series of funding, coveted magazine profiles, boardroom triumphs, but with each victory, the rush lasted less and less time, as though my soul were trying to tell me success alone couldn't fill the emptiness inside. By the time I turned 30, I was a millionaire many times over. The first time I signed a seven-figure deal, I felt an electric jolt of vindication. Clinking glasses at celebratory dinners, I basked in the glow of admiration. But in countless quiet moments, standing in my gleaming kitchen at 2 a.m, glass of scotch in hand, I felt it, a hollow ache that no accolade could soothe. The more I achieved, the less I felt. It was like pouring water into a bottomless pit. No matter how much I poured, it never registered. People told me, "Samuel, you have everything. What more could you want?" I'd plaster on a smile, nod politely, and mutter something about gratitude. But inside I felt stranded on an island of my own making. Relationships had become transactions, colleagues who smiled for favors, friends who lingered for access, partners who stayed for my status. I hadn't meant to build walls, but I was terrified of letting anyone see the doubt simmering beneath my composed exterior. So I kept everyone at arm's length, convinced vulnerability was a luxury I couldn't afford. To drown out the disquiet, I surrounded myself with distractions: lavish parties in penthouse ballrooms, exclusive retreats in exotic locales, impulsive purchases, a classic sports car, rare artworks, custom-designed watches. For a little while, those escapes numbed the ache. I'd laugh with influencers under swaying palm trees, shot glasses in hand, telling myself I was living my best life. But inevitably, the music faded, the entourage dispersed, and I was left alone with my reflections on the glossy marble floor. The first time my executive assistant, Claire, gently suggested I might not be happy, I snapped back defensively. "Of course I'm happy," I insisted, though I couldn't have told you why. Later, as her words replayed in my mind, I realized she had seen something I refused to acknowledge. I was a master of optics, but a stranger to contentment. That admission, uncomfortable, unavoidable, was like a splinter under my skin that I could no longer ignore. I wasn't raised in a religious household. My family believed in God in the abstract, but church was a rare Sunday outing. As I climbed the ladder of corporate success, faith slipped further from my life. Prayer felt unnecessary when I relied on talent and tenacity to secure every win. Yet lately, I found myself yearning for something beyond quarterly earnings and LinkedIn endorsements. Late at night, I'd stare at the ceiling of my penthouse, wondering if I had been wrong to dismiss the possibility of a higher purpose, if perhaps the void I felt was an invitation rather than a curse. Now, as I stand here in my high-rise sanctuary, the city's kaleidoscope of lights reflecting off the floor-to-ceiling windows, I can't shake the question, is this all there is? I sip my wine, listen to the distant roar of traffic, and marvel that I built this empire, and yet somehow failed to build a life worth living. The silence is deafening. My successes feel meaningless, my relationships superficial, and my achievements hollow. Tomorrow I'll attend another gala, shake another set of hands, deliver another carefully polished speech. But tonight, in the stillness, I confront the truth I've buried for too long. No amount of wealth or acclaim can mask the emptiness inside. And in that moment I realize the world I've made for myself has become a gilded cage, and I'm not sure how to break free. I remember the scent of warm bread drifting through our tiny kitchen before sunrise, my mother's gentle reminder that every loaf she baked was one less mouth to feed in our humble home. My father's work boots, scuffed and worn, sat by the door as proof of his 12-hour shifts at the mill. In those early years, success was measured in the fullness of our bellies and the laughter ringing down our narrow hallway. My name is Samuel Bennett, and I was born into a world where every penny mattered, where love was plentiful but luxuries were scarce. Growing up as the youngest of three, I learned quickly to fight for attention, not out of selfishness, but necessity. My older brother Michael excelled in sports, my sister Claire was a budding pianist. I, meanwhile, found my solace in math puzzles and the thrill of outsmarting my classmates in every quiz. When my parents celebrated my straight-A report cards, I basked in the glow of their pride, feeling the first stirrings of ambition take root. I convinced myself that if I could conquer every test, if I could outwork everyone else, I would never again feel powerless or invisible. School mornings followed the same rhythm, Dad rising before dawn to brew coffee, Mom zipping lunches and tying my shoelaces, while I wolfed down toast before the bus arrived. We didn't have much. Hand-me-down coats, threadbare soccer balls, a second-hand TV with an antenna that always lost signal during rainstorms. But my parents never let me feel deprived. Instead, they taught me to appreciate the dignity in hard work, the quiet joy of earning something with your own sweat and perseverance. I clung to that lesson like a lifeline. By the time I was in my teens, I had already decided that poverty was unacceptable and mediocrity unforgivable. I joined the debate team, launched a small tutoring gig for neighborhood kids, and started investing my modest savings in penny stocks I studied online. Every small victory, a debate trophy, a tutoring paycheck, a stock that inched upward, felt like evidence that I was on the right path. I was building something, however insignificant, and it made me feel alive. But even as I racked up achievements, a subtle ache began to form beneath the surface. During the summer I turned 16, I worked weekends at the local hardware store, unloading heavy boxes of nails and paint cans. The other teens my age were at the lake, laughing and diving in the water. I envied them their freedom, their ability to simply be. Late one July evening, after a 12-hour shift, I drove home in my beat-up sedan, windows down, sweat still clinging to my neck. I realized I had spent the entire summer working, barely seeing my friends, missing out on first loves and bonfires. I felt a pang of regret so sharp it caught me off guard. I'd won financial independence, but lost pieces of what made life feel worth living. College only intensified that paradox. I poured myself into every project, CO founding a campus investment club, launching a startup incubator, negotiating sponsorships for guest lectures. My dorm room walls became plastered with magazine clippings of tech moguls and TED Talk speakers, icons I was determined to emulate. I spent countless nights under harsh fluorescent library lights, fueling my ambitions with energy drinks and takeout coffee. Every milestone brought praise, scholarships, awards, internships at prestigious firms, yet each accolade came with an unspoken cost. My long-distance girlfriend broke up with me over a phone call I missed. My best friend drifted away, tired of hearing about my big plans, and in the still darkness of my dorm I felt that old familiar emptiness stirring again. The first time I admitted to myself that ambition might not be enough was the night I stood on the roof of our student center, overlooking the campus quad. Winter had just arrived, and frost glazed the lamps. I'd just secured a seven-figure seed round for my fledgling company, a monumental achievement for someone my age. My phone buzzed endlessly, "Congratulations, well done, you're an inspiration." But as I gazed at the frosty expanse below, I felt no triumph. Instead, I felt hollow, as if the victory belonged to someone else. I realized that success was external, dependent on approval, and that approval had its limits. No matter how many zeros I added to my bank account, the questions remained. Was I living with purpose? Did I matter beyond the sum of my achievements? After graduation, I moved to the city, the real city, with its bright lights and relentless pace. I traded my student loan burden for a corner office and a sliding scale salary. My first apartment was modest, a studio with a view of a brick wall. But I decorated it with framed front-page articles about our startup's milestones. For a while, the tangible symbols of success, wooden plaques, glossy spreads, distracted me from the gnawing inside. I attended networking events, schmoozed with venture capitalists, and posted snapshots of tuxedo dinners on social media. My calendar was a jigsaw puzzle of back-to-back meetings, every slot filled with someone or something that promised to push me closer to my goals. Yet with every new contact, every board chair handshake, the void grew more insistent. I'd come home at dawn, exhausted, and find myself staring at the ceiling, longing for silence. Real silence, not the background hum of data streams. One morning, I awoke on my designer couch, suit crumpled beneath me, phone dead, and realized I couldn't even remember my last genuine conversation. The realization hit me hard. I had mastered the art of looking busy but failed at the art of living. That day, I called my mother. She answered on the first ring, her voice bright with concern. "Samuel, are you all right? Or you never call this early." I paused, words tangled in my throat. I wanted to tell her I was winning, but also losing. I wanted to confess that the empire I'd built felt like quicksand, dragging me deeper into isolation. Instead, I mumbled reassurances and agreed to a weekend visit. Visiting home was both comforting and uncomfortable. Mom greeted me with a warm hug, and Dad offered his favorite recliner. I listened to their everyday worries, the creaky roof, Claire's nursing school tuition, my brother's new baby, and felt a strange yearning for the simplicity of it all. For a fleeting moment, I envied their focus on what truly mattered: family, health, small joys. I realized that in my pursuit of grand achievements, I'd neglected the very foundations that made life meaningful. That weekend, I walked the neighborhood where I'd grown up, the park where I scored my first soccer goal, the ice cream truck stop where I splurged my summer earnings, the schoolyard where I learned that working hard didn't guarantee happiness. In each place, I confronted the truth. I'd built my life on principles I once cherished: perseverance, integrity, hard work, but twisted them into yardsticks for success instead of foundations for contentment. By the time I returned to the city, a subtle shift had occurred. I wasn't ready to abandon my ambitions, far from it, but I knew that if I continued on my current path, I'd wake up one day in my penthouse and find my soul had slipped away entirely. I began to question every choice. Did I really need that fifth luxury car? Could I skip tonight's gala without derailing my brand? Would anyone miss me if I unplugged for a weekend retreat with no agenda? The cracks in my facade were widening, and I could no longer ignore the rush of cold air through the fissures. As I settled back into my sleek, glass-walled office, I faced a simple but terrifying question. If success couldn't fill me, what could? And in that moment, I realized that the journey ahead would require more than ambition. It would demand courage, vulnerability, and a willingness to seek answers beyond balance sheets and boardroom applause. That evening began like any other in my relentless pursuit of relevance. Another black tie gala at the city's grandest hotel, complete with crystal chandeliers, a string quartet playing Vivaldi, and waiters gliding between marble columns bearing silver trays of hors d'oeuvre. I arrived in my signature tuxedo, tailored to perfection, and was greeted by the doorman with a nod that seemed to say, "Well done, Samuel." I stepped inside, held my head high, and slipped seamlessly into the performance I'd mastered, the charming entrepreneur at the top of his game. The main ballroom was a tapestry of power and prestige. CEOs shook hands with senators, philanthropists exchanged coy smiles with celebrities, and investors whispered in hushed tones over flutes of champagne. I moved among them with ease, extending my hand here, offering a polished anecdote there, yet each congratulations felt like a rehearsed line in a play I no longer believed. The air was heavy with ambition and ambition's currency, influence. Every compliment I collected was tinged with the unspoken question, "What can you give me?" I laughed at jokes I didn't find funny and asked questions I knew the answers to, simply so I could hear the applause. Midway through dinner, I excused myself from a conversation about emerging markets and slipped toward the balcony doors. I needed a moment to breathe, to feel something genuine, if only for a heartbeat. Outside, the city stretched beneath me, a sea of lights pulsing with the restless energy of millions. I rested my palms on the wrought iron railing and inhaled the cool night air, letting it fill the hollows in my chest that wealth and accolades couldn't touch. At first, there was a faint tightening behind my sternum, an almost imperceptible reminder that I was mortal. I chalked it up to stress, the way one might dismiss a nagging glitch in a luxury car. I don't know how long I lay there on the cold marble floor of that hotel balcony once consciousness slipped through my fingertips. Time betrayed me. Seconds stretched into eternities, and every breath felt both impossibly distant and achingly vital. Then abruptly the pain in my chest vanished, and with it, any tether to the world I had known, the roar of the city, the carousel of my thoughts, even the panic that had seized me moments before, all of it dissolved into an expanse of profound stillness. At first I wondered if I'd died. My mind wasn't silent in the way sleep is silent. It was quieter than anything I'd ever imagined possible. The rushing of blood, the ticking of clocks, the hum of neon lights, none of it existed here. I felt weightless, suspended in a vast nothingness. There was no up or down, just an endless void that neither comforted nor frightened me. I realized there was no familiar boundary between inside and outside. Instead, I simply was. But as I exhaled, the tightening sharpened into a vice-like grip, radiating pain through my shoulder and down my left arm. My breath came in jagged gasps. Each inhale felt like I was trying to suck air through a cracked straw. I pressed a hand against my chest, half certain it would break free from my ribs. Panic flickered through me, a rare disruption in my controlled exterior. I frowned, blinking hard, struggling to steady my racing heart. Lights in the distance blurred, and the laughter from inside the ballroom became distant thunder. My thoughts scattered. Not now. I have an IPO to launch next month. I have commitments. I have a reputation to protect. But reasoning was a luxury I no longer had. The pain intensified, and a wave of dizziness crashed over me. My legs buckled beneath my weight. I braced one arm on the railing as the world spun. I tried to call out, "Help," but the word dissolved in my throat. My vision tunneled, as if someone dimmed the world's edges. Colors bled together, the black of my tuxedo merging with the night sky. I felt the coarse grain of the balcony's stone floor against my fingers as my grip slipped. A distant voice shouted, "He's collapsing," but it sounded like it was coming from underwater, muffled and surreal. My knees hit the ground first, then my chest. The cold marble was unforgiving, but I barely registered it. My heart pounded so violently it felt as if it might burst through my shirt. Thoughts raced. This can't be happening. Not now. I'm not ready. My phone slipped from my pocket, skittering across the floor, its emergency dialer blinking unanswered. I tried again to speak, to stave off the darkness, but all that emerged was a wet rasp. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the glittering city lights swirling like a kaleidoscope. A single thought echoed in my mind: if this is the end, what will become of Samuel Bennett, titan of industry, master of his destiny? And then, mercifully, no more thoughts, only the stillness of oblivion pulling me under. Curiosity replaced alarm. I tried to recall who I was, my name, my face, the outline of my life, but each memory felt like it was being viewed through fogged glass. I sensed that the details were there, just out of focus, waiting for me to reach out and touch them. When I tried to think of my body, the image dissolved. I was neither flesh nor bone. I was something far less concrete, yet somehow more real than the sum of my accomplishments. Fear, when it had gripped me on the balcony, had pulsed through me like electricity. Now there was no fear. I felt liberated from every anxiety that had plagued me. The dread of failure, the loneliness behind every handshake, the endless tick of the to-do list I carried in my mind. With the absence of pain came the absence of resistance. I surrendered to the stillness, and it surrendered to me, enfolding me in an embrace that felt like home. I drifted, or rather, I existed in a space where motion was meaningless. There were no sounds, but I sensed layers of existence around me, subtle gradients of sensation that I couldn't name. I felt the echo of my heartbeat, faint and distant, like the memory of a song long forgotten. I felt the slow, rhythmic pulse of the world below, as if the earth itself were breathing somewhere far away. And I felt my own essence, something I had never truly known until this moment. Questions floated in that stillness, but they carried no urgency. Is this the end? Am I unloved? Was my life worth anything? They seemed both crucial and trivial. I found myself responding to these questions without words. Perhaps this is the beginning of something I cannot yet comprehend. I am loved more deeply than I ever allowed myself to feel. My life matters, though I have not lived it fully. The answers arose from the stillness itself, as if the void was teaching me what my striving had forgotten. As I surrendered further, I sensed a subtle shift, a gentle stirring at the edge of that boundless quiet. It was like the faintest ripple on a placid lake, or a single note beneath a symphony of silence. I didn't know if I moved toward it or if it moved toward me. Movement was irrelevant here, but the sensation invited me to lean in, to acknowledge its presence. With that acknowledgement, a faint glow flickered in the distance, a pinpoint of something alive. The glow pulsed softly, as though breathing, and it resonated with something deep within me. I felt a flutter of recognition, a gentle hum of familiarity that melted the last shards of doubt. Into my field of perception filtered a color I had no name for, brighter than any sunrise, yet softer than candlelight. It didn't illuminate darkness so much as transmute it into an infinite warmth, and in that warmth I felt the first tender stirrings of hope. Without warning, the stillness receded and the glow expanded. It was no longer a distant star, but a sunrise flooding a horizon I hadn't known existed. It wasn't sunrise in the way I'd seen it on Earth. There was no sky or terrain, just light that radiated in all directions, dissolving the void into a living presence. I felt washed by it, not as a beam striking a body, but as an all-encompassing field that entered me from every angle. I tried to describe what came next, but language fails. I felt memory and possibility entwine. Recollections of my childhood kitchen, the clink of glasses at boardroom celebrations, the soft laughter of long-lost friends. Yet these images weren't linear. They coexisted within me, overlapping like layers in a tapestry. Each one brought a pang of nostalgia, a recognition that every moment of my life had led me here, to a place beyond time, beyond judgment, beyond fear. In the midst of this luminous expanse, I encountered a presence that felt neither distant nor commanding. It wasn't a figure at first, but a field of intelligence, warm, infinite, and alive. I sensed a compassionate awareness surrounding me, acknowledging every fragment of my being without hesitation. The presence whispered truths I had buried beneath ambition. You are known. You are loved. You are enough. Those words didn't resonate in my ears. They resonated in the core of my being, vibrating through the very substance of my essence. Emotions unfurled inside me, long-dormant compassion, gratitude, a willingness to surrender every fear. I let myself weep for the first time in years, not tears of sorrow, but tears of release. I wept for the years I'd spent chasing accolades at the expense of relationships, for the nights I'd drowned out loneliness with distractions, for the ways I'd built walls around my heart. And as I wept, each tear felt like a bridge being constructed, a pathway back to everything I had forsaken. In that space, my concept of self expanded. I was no longer the solitary entrepreneur I had thought myself to be. I felt connected to something vast, an endless web of consciousness that pulsed with love and unity. The boundaries between me and you, here and there, past and future, dissolved into a single current of being. I felt the heartbeat of every living creature, the cycle of birth and renewal, and the unbroken thread of purpose that wove us all together. Questions returned, but this time they sprang not from anxiety but from wonder. What is this place? Who am I within it? What awaits beyond? I sensed that answers would come, but in due season. For now, the invitation was simple: to trust, to surrender, to allow this presence to guide me deeper into its light. I felt a peaceful certainty that I was on the verge of discovering something beyond human comprehension, a revelation that would reshape every fiber of my existence. Time, if it could be called that, resumed its flow. The radiance that enveloped me coalesced into a column of light, a pillar I could sense as both guide and gateway. I felt compelled to move toward its center, to step into its brilliance as one would walk through a doorway. With each infinitesimal step, though step feels too physical a word, I shed layers of doubt and fear. My identity, as I had known it, peeled away like an old skin, revealing a soul unburdened and free. And then, at the core of that column, the light deepened into a presence I could see and feel more fully than anything on earth. It wasn't a man or woman, but a form suffused with love, radiant, intimate, wise. No words were spoken, speech felt too crude. Instead, the presence conveyed a single transcendent message: you are home. In that instant, every question I'd ever asked, every longing I'd ever felt, found its answer. I was exactly where I belonged. Even as I basked in that revelation, I sensed another stir, a gentle pull backward toward the world I had left behind. It wasn't a reprieve from death, but an assignment. The presence reached for me, not to hold me forever, but to prepare me for the journey back. In that reach, I felt an unspoken commission to carry this light into the shadows I had once called home, to live not for prestige, but for love, not for accumulation, but for connection. A sudden rush of air, a distant beeping, and the world of light began to recede. The stillness gave way to memory, the marble cold beneath me, the sterile hum of fluorescent lights. My body, fragile and battered, reclaimed me. I felt my chest heave with the effort of breath. I tasted antiseptic, heard muffled voices, felt calloused palms pressing against mine. The column of light faded into an echo, but its truth remained imprinted on my soul. As awareness returned, I knew I would never be the same. The void I had feared was a bridge to something entirely new. The presence that waited in the darkness was calling me forward, tasking me with a purpose I had yet to fully understand. And though I lay vulnerable on that hospital bed, I carried within me an unbreakable certainty that I had been known, I had been loved, and my life, fragile though it was, mattered in ways I was only beginning to comprehend. When I stirred, it was as though I had just returned from the edge of existence. My eyes fluttered against a haze of bright light, and the steady beeping of a monitor pulled me back to the hospital room. Yet in that moment of reawakening, I felt the weight of an unearthly stillness still clinging to me, as if part of my consciousness remained adrift in that silent void where pain and fear could not reach. My name is Samuel Bennett, and by all appearances I was lying in a hospital bed, tubing and cables tethering me to machines that spoke in rhythmic beeps and soft clicks. My body felt fragile, every muscle trembling under the strain of breath, but my soul felt strangely buoyant, as though it carried an echo of the light I had encountered when life slipped away on that balcony. Even as nurses bustled at my side, taking vitals and administering pain medication, I sensed another presence waiting just beyond the edges of my perception, a faint glow pulsing in time with my heartbeat, calling me forward. For days afterward, my waking hours were consumed by routine, doctors rounding, family visiting, whispered prayers in the hushed corridors. Friends arrived bearing bouquets and bottles of champagne, congratulating me on the miracle of my recovery. I offered polite smiles, yet with every "I'm so glad you're okay," I felt an unspoken question echo in my mind: what happened to me out there? I longed to share the ineffable brilliance, the light's melody, its gentle pull, but I could find no words. How could I describe a presence that filled me from within and beyond, one that transcended every human description of warmth or peace? Despite the beeping monitors and antiseptic smell, I carried my own beacon within me, a subtle radiance beneath my ribs, urging me to look beyond the sterile walls. In quiet moments, I closed my eyes and returned to that place of light. I felt weightless again, suspended in an expanse that was neither darkness nor brightness, but the source of both. I sensed the whisper of that presence, patient and compassionate, reminding me that my time was not over, and that the journey I had begun beyond human boundaries was not yet complete. My body healed slowly, but my soul opened quickly. I found myself drawn to the hospital's chapel, a small circular room bathed in stained glass hues long before I had any conscious need for ritual. I slipped inside one afternoon, drawn by the quiet hush that reminded me of the stillness I had known. Sitting in the front pew, I focused on the colored light dancing across the floor, and I felt a stirring in my chest, a hunger to commune with whatever had reached for me in the void. I closed my eyes and prayed in the only way I knew how, with open questions. If you are there, I whispered into the silence. If that light invited me deeper, show me where to begin. The words felt foreign on my tongue, as though I had never uttered them before. And yet, beneath the ache of my ribs and the hum of hospital life, I heard a distant, gentle resonance, an answering pulse that vibrated through my core and whispered, "Trust. Come beyond what you know." Over the next week, my medical team cleared me for discharge, cautioning me to take things slowly. My family rejoiced. My assistant, Claire, wept with relief. My parents offered blessings they said they had prayed for every hour since I collapsed. But when I walked out of the hospital, supported by my sister's arm, I felt neither triumph nor gratitude for surviving. Instead, I felt the weight of a mission unspoken, an assignment encoded in the light I still carried. Returning to my penthouse felt surreal. The polished marble floors, the minimalist furnishings, the panoramic view of the city's glowing web, all of it felt muted, as though seen through smoke. I had once believed this skyline was the zenith of human achievement, steel towers rising defiantly against the night, each lit window representing ambition in motion. Now, the sight stirred in me a different longing, not for accumulation, but for connection to something transcendent, hiding behind the city's clamor. That evening, I wandered through my living room, tracing my fingers over the glass railings and brushed metal accents, but the objects registered less and less. My gaze returned again and again to the skyline, and I felt the beacon within me pulse more urgently. I realized I had to give shape to the light I had seen, that the collapse on the balcony was both an end and an invitation to embark on a new journey, one that would bridge the realm of light beyond human comprehension and the realm of shadows I had helped create. I began by ordering a simple candle, a humble wick and wax vessel, rather than the expensive art installations I once commissioned. I placed it on my dining table, lit it, and watched the flame dance. In its flicker, I saw memories of that vast column of light that pulsed in the void. I leaned forward, entranced by its movement, and felt the presence of my unseen guide drawing nearer. The candle's glow was but a pale reflection of the light that had filled me, yet in that small flame I recognized the power of even a single point of warmth to carve through darkness. Fueled by that recognition, I reached out to Claire. She had become more than an assistant. She was the anchor to my earthly life, the one person who had witnessed my collapse and stayed by my side through the ordeal. Over coffee in my kitchen, far simpler than our usual lunchtime at a five-star restaurant, I struggled to find the words. "I can't go back to how things were," I said, voice trembling not with illness but with anticipation. "Something happened to me, something I can't fully explain, but I know that I have to follow it." Her eyes, pink-rimmed from worry, searched mine. She set down her latte. You mean the collapse, the heart attack? I nodded. No offense, Sam, but you need a counselor or spiritual advisor, someone to help you process this trauma. I shook my head. It's not just trauma, it's a call. I felt a presence, calm, all-encompassing, alive. It wasn't fear, it wasn't love as I've known it. It was an invitation, come further. Claire took a deep breath, opened her mouth, then closed it again. Okay, she said finally. Let's figure this out together. Our first step was simple. I requested we clear my schedule of all non-essential meetings and events. My calendar, once crammed with investor pitches and board meetings, was now a barren landscape. In the empty slots, I carved out time to sit in silence, something I had once derided as unproductive. I sat in my office, in meditation, focusing on my breath, my heartbeat, and the faint, pulsing light I carried. Often, I felt the presence brush past the edges of my awareness, guiding me to deepen my attention. Next, I visited an old mentor, Father Gabriel, a priest I had known only in passing through charity events. He welcomed me into his modest parish rectory and listened as I recounted my experience, the collapse, the void, the light. His eyes widened, but he offered no judgment. Instead, he said, "You have seen beyond, Samuel. Now you must learn to bring that vision into the world." He taught me to center myself in prayer, not as a ritual, but as a way to align my will with something greater. Under his guidance, I learned to ask questions in the quiet, to open my heart rather than shield it. As days passed into weeks, the pulsing guidance grew stronger. It beckoned me not only inward, but outward. To people I had neglected, I began reaching out, first to old friends, the roommate who had drifted away when I got too busy, the college teammate who had always believed in me, the childhood neighbor who once taught me how to ride a bike. I invited them to coffee, not to network, but to listen and reconnect. At first their eyebrows lifted in surprise. I had once been aloof, always with a strategic objective, but as I sat across from them, genuinely curious and open, I felt the ember of connection reignite. One afternoon, I drove to the neighborhood where I grew up. The park where I scored my first goal was still there, the swing set's paint chipped, the grass overgrown. I sat on a bench and closed my eyes, letting the beacon within me expand outward. In my mind's eye, I saw family picnics and laughter, the solidarity of shared struggle. I prayed silently for the courage to carry that spirit into every choice I made. But the summons was not limited to personal reconciliation. I felt drawn to act on a larger canvas. The presence within me seemed to whisper of communities divided by fear, of shadows feeding on fractured hearts. I began investigating local shelters, food banks, conflict resolution initiatives, places where love felt scarce and need palpable. My instincts dithered between writing a check and rolling up my sleeves. The light urged me firmly toward the latter. I volunteered at a soup kitchen, listening to people's stories, offering not pity but genuine empathy. I joined a mediation circle, bringing together neighbors at odds over property disputes, learning how small acts of understanding could mend deep rifts. Everywhere I went, the beacon pulsed, an internal guide unfazed by my doubts. When I felt uncertain, it glowed brighter, as if cheering me onward. Sometimes the path seemed unclear. How to balance my business responsibilities with this new calling? But the guidance came in subtle nudges. A canceled meeting that freed up time to meet a struggling mother, a chance encounter with a homeless man who shared wisdom I couldn't have gleaned from a boardroom. Gradually, my work with the foundation I later established began to crystallize. Lights of Hope, a nonprofit dedicated to nurturing community ties, fostering spiritual growth and empowering acts of compassion. But the real foundation was the internal shift, the willingness to be guided by a presence beyond personal ambition. I hired staff not based on resumes but on empathy. I allocated funds not for grandiose buildings but for grassroots programs led by those with lived experience of pain and resilience. Through it all, the beacon remained my constant companion. In moments of exhaustion, when the demands of recovery, family, and philanthropy collided, I closed my eyes, breathed deeply, and felt the gentle pulse within. It reminded me that the light I had glimpsed beyond death was not fleeting, it was ever present, waiting for me to reflect it into every corner of my fractured world. And so, standing on the threshold of this new life, I realized the journey that began on that hotel balcony had led me not to an endpoint, but to a beginning, a pilgrimage of mercy, love, and purpose. The beacon beyond had guided me back from the brink, and now beckoned me forward, urging me to become a point of light in the shadows, a living testament to the power of surrender, and a witness to the infinite grace that had found me in my darkest hour. I never imagined that light could take form, or that form could be love made manifest. One moment I was drifting within the pillar of radiance, suspended in a boundless stillness. The next, that stillness coalesced into presence. I became aware of someone, or something, standing before me. It wasn't imposing or austere. Instead, it felt like the truest friend I'd ever known, beckoning me deeper into the brilliance. I opened my mind as if waking from a dream. The presence resolved into a figure clothed in light so pure it defied description. Neither white nor gold nor silver, but all of these and far more. I sensed an ancient kindness emanating from every fiber of this being's essence. For a heartbeat, I feared I had hallucinated the entire experience, but then the figure moved closer, and I felt a solidity in the air, as though every molecule around me vibrated with love. When the figure spoke, it wasn't with words that rattled my eardrums. I felt the presence of that living light draw me upward, lifting me gently beyond the confines of my body, beyond the hospital room's narrow walls and the city's grid of streets and alleys. In a breathless instant, the world unfolded beneath me. Yet this was not the world I knew. It was the same globe of continents and oceans I'd admired from skyscraper windows, but it glowed with an unseen tapestry, an ethereal web of energy, pulsing with currents of hope and eddies of despair. From high above I saw city lights twinkling like constellations, but interlaced between them were fissures, thin dark cracks that coursed through neighborhoods and coastlines alike. These cracks weren't scars in pavement or rivers cutting through canyons, they were fractures of the human spirit, places where fear, anger, and isolation had made the ground brittle. Rather, it spoke directly into my consciousness, each syllable carrying depth and warmth beyond any human tone. "Samuel, you have journeyed far." Those 3 words resonated in my core like a melodious chord. I knew I had met something, or someone, greater than anything I'd ever known. I tried to respond, but my voice felt useless in that realm. Instead, I summoned a gesture of longing and wonder. The figure inclined its head, a silent gesture of invitation. Hesitantly, I stepped, or wished to step, toward it. Instantly, the light around me brightened, and I felt waves of tenderness washing over every fear I had carried. Then I recognized the face, not from textbooks or church paintings, but from a memory buried so deep it felt preternatural. It was the face of Jesus, not the distant, stern figure I had once imagined, but a living embodiment of grace, eyes luminous with compassion, a smile that dissolved every barrier in my heart, and hands extended in welcome. "Tend your heart to me," he conveyed, and the intimacy of that invitation shocked me. Here stood the one I had revered from afar, yet he spoke to me with the familiarity of a lifelong friend. I felt tears rise unbidden as every pretense fell away. In that gaze, I wasn't the CEO, the entrepreneur, the person who had built and lost and built again. I was simply human, fragile, flawed, but infinitely beloved. I reached out, searching for his hand. At my touch, warmth flared through my entire being, and I felt fear and shame evaporate. All the doubts I'd carried, am I enough? Did my life matter? Crumbled in that light. Instead, a single truth took root. I am known. I am loved. My rational mind tried to grasp the significance, but reason fell short. I was overwhelmed by the realization that love could be both power and presence, more essential than breath itself. In my heart, I carried questions I'd never dared ask. Why did I chase success so blindly? What was the meaning of all my striving? Before I could form the words, Jesus' presence answered me. I felt his compassion enfolding my regrets, and regrets transforming into lessons. I understood. Without a whisper, my pursuit of wealth had been a pale echo of a deeper longing for belonging. My ambition had been fueled by a fear of insignificance, a fear that vanished in his embrace. Then I sensed him guiding me inward, to the hidden chambers of my heart. I saw memories flicker, nights spent alone in penthouse solitude, moments when I chose work over family, days when I hid my doubts behind a polished smile. Each memory surfaced not to condemn me, but to offer healing. As each regret rose, the presence poured light into it, like sunlight dissolving frost. I felt a profound mercy that washed over every failure, every lapse, every self-imposed wound. A still, small voice, his voice, echoed in my soul. You are not defined by what you have done, but by who you are. I love you not for your achievements, but for your being. The simplicity and radical nature of that truth tore down every wall I had built around my heart. I wept freely, tears of relief and joy mingling in a flood of release. He did not rush me. Time, meaningless in that realm, stretched as long as I needed. When I was ready, he looked into my eyes, those eyes that had once seen only targets and metrics, and I felt a reflection of my true self, vulnerable yet whole, broken yet composed of infinite worth. I understood then that this encounter was not a reward, but a turning point. I had been given a glimpse of reality's core. Love is the essence of existence, and everything else flows from it. In that moment, Jesus conveyed a silent promise. The purpose you seek will unfold as you abide in this love. His outstretched hand offered not a roadmap or instructions, but an invitation to walk in companionship, to let love reshape every step. I sensed that my mission, my real mission, would spring from this living connection. A gentle current drew me back toward the column of light I had entered through. I wanted to linger, to drink deeply of the presence, but I also felt the stirrings of responsibility. The world I had left behind, my family, my friends, my city, still existed within the fold of this love, waiting to be touched by it. His gaze held both infinite compassion and urgency, return and shine. As the light began to recede, I found myself trembling with anticipation and awe. I closed my eyes, imprinting every nuance of that encounter on my soul. When I opened them again, I was back on the hotel balcony. Cold stone beneath me, the city lights twinkling mockingly in the distance. Paramedics knelt over me, but their faces were blurred. All that mattered was the flame still glowing in my chest. Even as EMTs lifted me onto a stretcher and carried me through the maelstrom of fluorescent corridors, I carried a secret flame, an unshakable knowledge that I had touched the source of all love. That knowledge transformed every fear into courage, every hesitation into possibility. I realized I was not merely a survivor of a near-death event. I was a messenger of the love that had found me. In the days that followed, as I lay in a hospital bed surrounded by anxious faces, I couldn't shake the memory of that presence. I knew the world needed more than my business acumen. It needed the transformative power of love embodied in every choice. I vowed then, though I could not yet articulate how, that I would live in the light of this encounter, letting love guide my every action. And so, as I drifted back to full awareness, I carried with me the echo of a simple, radical truth. To be loved is to be alive, and to love is to fulfill the deepest purpose of existence. From that moment on, success would no longer be measured by balance sheets or applause, but by the depth of love I reflected into the world. When I finally stepped out of my penthouse and onto the streets of the city I once thought I owned, something shifted in me. The air smelled sharper, alive with possibility. The people passing by, some burdened by exhaustion, others wrapped in silent loneliness, no longer seemed like background extras in my life's grand production. They were human souls, each a potential spark in the darkness. My name is Samuel Bennett, and I had been tasked to become a ripple maker, a conduit of the light I'd encountered beyond death. I began that mission in the most ordinary way possible, by asking questions. Over morning coffee at a corner cafe, I sat without agenda and simply observed. I noticed the barista's tired smile as she slung lattes. I asked her about her day. She hesitated, then confessed she was studying for nursing school and juggling 2 jobs. I listened, really listened, and when I left, I slipped an envelope of cash into her hand with a note, "Keep chasing your dream. You matter." In some areas, the cracks were narrow, like fine hairlines. In others, they yawned wide, swallowing entire districts in shadows that writhed and shifted. Along each fissure I sensed creatures, shapes of darkness that slithered and pulsed, feeding on the raw emotions that birthed them. They weren't demonic caricatures from nightmares, but subtle, insidious forms that thrived on every instance of hatred, on every whispered prejudice, on every act of greed. I watched as one shadow curled around a politician's campaign rally, amplifying resentment and mistrust. Another drifted through a family dinner, magnifying the unspoken hurts between siblings. These beings grew stronger wherever human hearts chose division over unity, suspicion over compassion. Yet in the spaces between the cracks, sparks of light glimmered, points of warmth and clarity that shone against the gloom. Some flickered like solitary candles in a vast hall, others flared brighter, like bonfires on a windswept shore. Each spark represented a choice, a moment when someone chose generosity over self-interest, forgiveness over revenge, community over isolation. I saw a teacher stay late to comfort a bullied child, and the light that emanated from her action knotted itself into nearby sparks, forming a small constellation that began to heal the fissure in that schoolyard. I watched a factory worker refuse to spread rumors about a coworker, and the ember of kindness rippled out across the assembly line, mending the cracks in broken friendships. The presence that guided me whispered, "This is the world as it is." In that declaration lay both sorrow and inevitability. I saw entire cities where darkness ran rampant, fissures so wide that shadows danced across entire neighborhoods, sowing crime and despair. I saw communities fractured by poverty and prejudice, where the spark of hope was nearly extinguished. In those places the creatures feasted, their hunger insatiable, because every slight, every injustice, every act of turning away fed them further. Yet even in those darkest regions, there remained flickers of resistance, people lighting small lamps against the void. A single mother who, despite her exhaustion, volunteered at a homeless shelter. A group of neighbors from rival factions who organized. A shared garden to feed their children. A teenager who refused to post hateful comments online and instead offered words of encouragement. Each of these lights was fragile, but each had the power to inspire another spark in the darkness, and another until constellations formed that could begin stitching the world whole again. As I watched these interplays of light and shadow, I felt grief that so much of what I once admired, towering achievements, glittering skylines, impressive career milestones, were virtually invisible in the spiritual portrait. They flickered faintly, if at all, compared to the luminous impact of simple acts of love. Power and prestige cast only pale reflections, easily snuffed out by the shadow creatures. Only choices born from love and sacrifice glowed with enduring. The vision shifted, and I found myself drawn to the largest fissure of all, a canyon of despair that split an entire nation. On one side, I saw rallies fueled by fear, headlines stoking division, families torn apart by ideological schisms. Shadow creatures swarmed there, their forms so thick they darkened the sky. On the other side, I saw isolated pockets of light. Grassroots activists offering meals to migrants, interfaith groups organizing dialogues, neighbors opening their homes to the lonely. Those lights dimmed in the face of the vast darkness, but they did not extinguish. The presence murmured, "This is what choice looks like." The enormity of it struck me, how a single spark can flicker out under overwhelming gloom, yet how it can also inspire others to light their own flames. I realized then that healing would not come through grand proclamations or technological breakthroughs alone, but through the cumulative effect of countless small decisions to choose love. And then the vision changed again. I hovered over my own city, streets I walked as Samuel Bennett. I saw myself everywhere I had trod, the boardrooms where I negotiated deals, the glass-walled offices where I isolated myself, behind tasks, the lavish parties where I laughed without joy. Those places lay dark, cracked open with the ache I had carried. But in other corners, along quiet streets, in modest community centers, at the doorstep of my childhood home, I saw lights I had yet to ignite, a spark waiting for me to choose compassion over indifference, presence over distraction. My chest tightened as I realized the personal weight of the vision. I was not a helpless observer, I was a steward of light. The presence's tone softened. "You have been given much, Samuel. Now you must give." I understood that I was meant not only to carry the flame of love I had received, but to fan it into flames across the fissures of my own life and beyond. Images flashed of people I knew, friends I had neglected, family I had taken for granted, strangers I had avoided. Each visage was paired with a seed of light waiting for me to plant it. An apology to my sister for distant phone calls, dedicated time with my aging parents, an open-hearted conversation with a former rival, investment of not just money but time in neighborhood projects. Each act would be a lamp placed in the darkness, knitting the fractured edges together. Finally, I saw a vision of what the world could become if enough lights found one another and formed constellations, fissures healing, cracks knitting closed, and the shadow creatures dissolving into nothing. I saw neighborhoods transformed into communities, nations reknit by acts of solidarity, and a global chorus of compassion rising above the din of fear. It felt like a dream, yet in that moment I believed it was possible, because I had tasted the source of all love. Then the vision began to dissolve like morning mist under the sun. The crack lines, the creatures, the sparks, they all receded until I hovered again in the column of light that was my passage between worlds. I carried within me the memory of that fractured earth, not as a burden of despair, but as a call to action. The presence whispered one final message: "Go, and be the lens through which this world sees love." As I drifted back into my physical form, the weight of that commission settled in my heart. My breaths were ragged, my limbs weak, yet I felt an unshakable resolve to be a beacon in the places where the cracks ran deepest, to light my own deliberate sparks of kindness, and to inspire others to do the same. The fractures remained, but now I knew the true power of light, and that together we could begin to heal a fractured world. Her eyes watered, mine welled. That small act, I realized, was the first stone dropped in a pond. Before long, I formalized my efforts. The Lights of Hope Foundation I'd envisioned took shape, grounded in 3 pillars: presence, service, and connection. Presence meant showing up. No hierarchy, no media cameras, just real people meeting real needs. Service meant rolling up my sleeves alongside others, not from some distant executive suite. Connection meant building bridges across divides of class, race, ideology. I hired a small team of dedicated volunteers who shared my passion for grassroots action. We traded polished press releases for listening sessions in community centers and church basements. Our first project was modest, a neighborhood cleanup in an area showing signs of neglect. 10 of us, employees from my startup, neighbors curious enough to join, a few high school students keen on community service, armed ourselves with trash bags, gloves, and a shared sense of purpose. By midday, litter that had lain scattered for months was gone. More importantly, we stood in a circle amid freshly swept sidewalks, sweaty but smiling, and swapped stories. A retiree who once felt invisible now had new friends. A teenager who scoffed at old folks talked animatedly about college aspirations. The cleanup's ripple wasn't just cleaner streets, it was renewed community spirit. Encouraged, we expanded our scope. At a local soup kitchen, I donned an apron and ladled soup. For the first time, my tailored suit replaced by a simple t-shirt. Across the counter, an older man named Luis glanced at my name tag and asked, "Are you here for tax purposes or because you care?" The question stung, but I smiled and said, "Because I care." Over bowls of stew, Luis shared how his daughter had died of illness last year, and he felt lost. I listened, heart aching, and offered to connect him with a grief support group sponsored by our foundation. That single conversation became a lifeline not only for Luis, but for others he brought in, each finding comfort in shared stories. Meanwhile, I reached back into my corporate world to reshape the culture there. At Monday morning leadership meetings, I scrapped the usual KPI presentations and proposed a Stories of Impact segment. Executives would share one act of kindness they'd witnessed or performed that week. The first week was awkward. A cough, a clearing of throats. Then one manager told how she'd covered a colleague's shift when she learned he was struggling to care for his newborn. Heads nodded, a smile flickered. By month's end, our office halls echoed with genuine laughter, and productivity climbed, not because of blind ambition, but because people felt seen and valued. In parallel, I launched a mentorship program for at-risk youth in underfunded schools. Volunteers from my company paired up with students, offering homework help, career guidance, or simply companionship. I still remember meeting Jasmine, a bright 13-year-old fascinated by biology but discouraged by her school's crumbling lab. We spent afternoons building a small hydroponic system from recycled materials. Her eyes lit up as she watched seedlings sprout. Months later, she won a regional science fair prize. Jasmine's spark spread, her classmates, inspired, started a peer tutoring club. Their light pushed back the darkness of apathy and gave hungry minds something to crave. Each of these initiatives, though small, created ripples. We tracked quantitative metrics: number of meals served, streets cleaned, mentoring hours logged. But the real impact lay in qualitative changes, a buzz of camaraderie in neighborhoods once rife with suspicion, conversations between people who'd never thought to speak, neighborhoods petitioning the city council for improved services because they believed their voices mattered. One chilly October evening, a volunteer named Marie invited me to a candlelight vigil at a park where a young man had been killed in a gang shootout. His mother had organized the gathering, hoping to transform grief into hope. Flickering candles formed a circle around a single larger flame in the center. Marie handed me a candle and whispered, "This is why we do it." As I lit the wick, I felt the warmth and remembered the pillar of light that had guided me. Mothers, fathers, teenagers, all stood silent, united by loss and yearning for peace. That vigil became a launch pad. From it arose a community coalition that petitioned for youth recreation programs, leading the local government to fund after-school sports leagues. A single candle had ignited a movement. The Foundation's third pillar, connection, led me next to bridge ideological divides. In a polarized town hall meeting about proposed zoning changes, tempers flared and voices rose. The community splintered between those wanting luxury condos and those fearing displacement. Armed with empathy and a listening ear, I facilitated a small group of residents representing both sides. We shared food and personal stories. The lifelong resident who feared losing her rent-stabilized apartment, and the development advocate who'd grown up in public housing and saw opportunity in new investment. Through gentle questioning and genuine attention, we fostered understanding. While not everyone agreed in the end, the ripples of mutual respect softened rancor, and a compromise emerged: mixed-income units with priority allocation for long-term residents. Parallel to these efforts, I recognized the need to address spiritual emptiness. I organized soul cafe gatherings in local churches and community centers, informal, drop-in events where music, poetry, and reflective conversation mingled. No creed was imposed. The invitation was simply to seek meaning and connection. At one soul cafe, a former addict named Marcus shared his story of redemption and led a group in writing letters of forgiveness to family members. Letters were mailed that week: a daughter forgiven an absentee father, a son forgiven a neglectful mother. Those letters became seeds bearing fruit in reconciled families and renewed hope. As winter turned to spring, the cumulative effect of these ripples became undeniable. Neighborhood newsletters began featuring spotlight on light columns, celebrating ordinary acts of kindness. Local businesses offered discounts to volunteers. Schools integrated community service into their curricula. Faith groups of various denominations collaborated on interfaith projects. The city's mayor invited me to serve on a compassion and community task force, not to legislate, but to advise on fostering civic empathy. Every time I felt overwhelmed, I closed my eyes and recalled the column of light carrying me beyond death, the compassionate presence that spoke silent truths, and the vision of a fractured world mended by sparks of love. In those moments, I felt the gentle pulse of the beacon within me, guiding my next step. I understood that ripples are not solitary events, but an ever-widening wave. A single act of kindness begets another and another, until what began as a candle in a dark park becomes a global constellation of light. One late afternoon, I stood at the edge of the bay, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The water reflected auburn and gold, and a soft breeze carried the laughter of children playing nearby. I thought of all the lives touched, the barista with nursing school dreams, the older man finding support after loss, the student whose science aspirations took flight, the vigil mothers holding candles against despair. Each life was a drop in the ocean, but together they created a tide strong enough to reshape the shoreline. In that moment, I whispered a silent prayer of gratitude for the second chance to live, for the light that found me, and for the privilege of being an instrument of love. I resolved again to keep dropping stones into the pond, one question, one conversation, one volunteer hour at a time. For I knew now that ripples of light are the fabric of healing, the antidote to the fractures that bind us in fear. And as long as one candle remains lit, there is hope that darkness will retreat, if only to be driven back by the flicker of a single human heart choosing love. I woke to sunlight dancing through half-drawn curtains, the soft hum of the city below like a distant heartbeat. My chest still ached from the collapse that nearly stole my life, but today the pain felt different, less a reminder of trauma and more a call to action. My name is Samuel Bennett, and for the first time since that night on the balcony, I felt fully present in my body, grateful not only to be alive, but to be alive for a reason. Sitting up, I noticed framed photographs on my nightstand, images of community cleanups, mentoring sessions with Jasmine, moments from that candlelight vigil. They had replaced the art gallery prints I once prized. Each photo held a story of transformation, a story I was now part of. My phone buzzed with messages, an update from Luisa's support group, an invitation from a grieving mother to join a neighborhood healing circle, a thank you note from the barista, whose career I had helped fund. Normally I'd scroll through such messages mechanically, but this morning I paused, savoring each one. By mid-morning I was in my makeshift home office, really just a corner of my living room reclaimed for Lights of Hope coordination. My team gathered on a video call from across the city. Marie from the soup kitchen, Claire coordinating volunteer sign-ups, Marcus organizing the next Soul Cafe. We reviewed progress metrics, meals served, mentorship hours, neighborhood events, and then paused to share stories of light, just as I'd introduced in my old board meetings. Marie spoke of a man who learned to read at age 50. Claire described a formerly shut-in senior who now led her knitting circle in donating blankets to the homeless. Each story lifted our spirits and reminded us that purpose is discovered in connection, not in corporate milestones. Later, I drove to my childhood neighborhood, craving the familiarity and the reminder of where my journey began. The park bench where I'd once scored that first soccer goal now hosted a group of teens from my mentoring program, helping repaint the community center's mural. As I walked toward them, one of the girls, no longer shy, greeted me with a wave. We talked about her dreams, nursing school, a desire to work in pediatric oncology. I encouraged her, drawing on the same words I'd shared with that barista, "Your life has purpose, keep chasing it." I felt the ripple. Her excitement would inspire her classmates, her confidence would reshape her path. That afternoon, I hosted a planning session for a new initiative, Be the Bridge, a series of small grants to empower neighbors to launch micro projects that build connection, like block parties, community gardens, or intergenerational reading partners. I watched as community leaders pitched ideas, their eyes alight with possibility. A retiree proposed a Stories of U.S. podcast featuring life stories from longtime residents. A school teacher pitched an after-school robotics club for girls. I realized anew that true purpose unfolds when people are given the resources to act on their own vision of love and service. By early evening, I was back in my penthouse, but the space felt different, as though its walls had absorbed the day's life-giving energy. I poured a modest glass of wine and stepped onto the balcony, breathing in the warm air. Below, the city's lights blinked to life. But now I saw more than glowing windows. I saw neighbors sharing dinner in courtyards, a church parking lot transformed into a food pantry, a streetlight under which children laughed as they practiced their robotics club's drone maneuvers. Each light in the darkness was a testament to choice. I closed my eyes and remembered the vision Jesus had shown me, the fissures of fear and division crisscrossing the world, the creatures that fed on our isolation, and the sparks of light that could heal communities. I saw my own life reflected in those images, past decisions that widened cracks, and the everyday choices I was now making to mend them. I felt the presence of that guiding love pressing gently against my heart, reminding me that purpose is not a destination, but a living, breathing journey of love. My phone chimed again, a close friend, once distant, now texting to suggest a weekend retreat in the mountains to plan our next Be the Bridge expansion. I smiled, knowing that the real work, building a global constellation of light, would be carried out not from boardrooms, but from countless kitchen tables, schoolyards, and street corners. I replied, "Count me in. Let's light more corners of the world." As the city's glow deepened and the first stars appeared overhead, I realized my life had come full circle. The towering ambitions that once ruled me had been replaced by a simpler, more profound drive to love and to serve. The empire I thought defined me was now a platform to uplift others. The money and accolades still existed, but they were reframed as tools, resources to fuel compassion, not ends in themselves. That night, before sleep claimed me, I whispered a prayer of gratitude for the second chance on that balcony, for the encounter that redefined my soul, and for the countless ripples of light that had transformed a fractured world into a mosaic of hope. My journey was far from over. In fact, it had truly begun. But I no longer walked alone. I carried within me the beacon of love that called me onward, guiding me toward every crack that needed healing and every heart that yearned to shine. And in that knowing, I found my purpose.